Okay, well, I think I'm recording this. This is new to me. This is my second of these, and I should thank barberfinancial.com. Okay, here we go. We're going to get Paul Myers in here, an amazing guest with a crazy career. Let's see, it wants me to add him. And I see his face already.
And have you got my video? No, you don't. Hold on.
Yep. And there you are.
And in real time, no less.
Hello, my brother.
Hey, I'm good. I just want to make sure. Are you hearing that from there?
I am. You sound really good.
Well, it's a Shure SM7B. I use it on my own podcast.
That's the thing. I want to start off because I want people to understand how many things you do, and then we're going to get right into the podcast and work backwards. I met you as the guy from the Gravelberries, which was a really decent pop band in Canada. We didn't have too many bands like that. Kind of I don't know how to describe it, but to me, after Ben Folds 5 came out, I kind of thought they were carrying the flag a little bit. It was that kind of pure pop.
Except it wasn't piano. Yeah, it was like
right. It wasn't piano, but it was
the one identifying factor of the Ben Folds 5 was piano. But I think the phrase I've been comfortable with was power pop. Although power pop for some people was a ghettoized term, but for me it meant in the tradition of Cheap Trick, and maybe later progenitors were Sloan and the Odds from Vancouver.
Right.
And those are like my dream bands. Those are the bands that took the Elvis Costello XTC torch and ran with it into a slightly more guitar punky way. But I wouldn't say we were ever a punk band, the Gravelberries, although I was in punk bands before that. So.
That's right. The XTC is a great way of saying, because it was catchy songs, and they were definitely pop, but they had a little more energy. So I knew you from that. Then kind of followed your career. Well, we worked together. We'll get to that later too. But then with your books, you're so busy, and I want to go through some of that. But right now, first off, podcast. Oh my, your Record Store Day podcast. When did that start? How did that
do you like it? I mean,
I
you say, oh my, okay.
We're music nerds. So
I have the logo behind me here. It's a 12-inch record. It's not really a record. It's just a 12-inch record cover that I made.
You get major people, and I would say it's because you're on both sides of this. You're a musician. You did TV and radio also, especially in Vancouver. So I think you've done a little bit of everything. But when you get guests, I love how much you know about them. You're like the Brian Linehan of the music circle or something.
No, that's a Toronto reference that I've used, maybe a Canada-wide reference. I've used it several times. I always tell my wife, Lisa, that I had another Linehan moment where somebody, I can't remember, I think it was Lucinda Williams or something. I don't want to pass on compliments from other people, but somebody said, hey, you knew, I'm surprised you knew that. I'm surprised you picked up on that. And, but I will say this, thank you. I will say this. One of the things that you're just cotton on to, which is because my first love was being a musician. My second love was writing about music and sort of like from the point of view of being a musician. So when I wrote, the first time I actually wrote an article about a musician was Ron Sexsmith. And I wrote it from the point of view of, isn't this great that a Toronto songwriter was getting mentioned in Mojo magazine in the UK, and that Elvis Costello was holding up his record. And I was like, and what's that like from inside the Toronto scene? Right. So then I realized, oh my God, I know how to push words around, and wrote a few other things. And then, Impact magazine hired me in Toronto, and I started interviewing Iggy Pop and people like that. And I realized that my kind of, what do you call that? Not an ace in the hole, because that sounds too self-important, but my area of strength is that I've been in tour buses. I've been on stages. I've had friends signed to major deals that go nowhere, or go somewhere and then go nowhere. And then I've seen how there's a commonality of the musician's experience. The men and women who make music, and everybody has had this experience. And I then say, well, how do I express that? And the love of craft, which is the other thing I bring to it, which is I am so in awe of when people make a record or create a song, and if they have real talent that is there and real expression. I'm just in awe the way you are, and all music listeners and fans.
Like you're a super fan, like you're a really big fan. You have knowledge and somehow a deep memory. Might be the lack of drinking, but you have really remember details. But also, then you ask the question in a way that isn't a brainy super fan. It's kind of a bit more of a peer. Your questions are going to be coming from a place where you both understand. So I think you see
I know what you mean
that way.
Well, something I try to do less and less is bring myself into the question, but because that's kind of a college rock trick. But I do find that in the case of Lucinda Williams and recently Kathleen Edwards, which hasn't aired yet, I found myself hearing about depression from them and saying, I can't help but want them to know that I'm a recovering alcoholic who is a depression sufferer. And I thankfully have the tools and I'm coping.
Yeah.
But I want them to know so that they feel a little bit more comfortable understanding it's, I
Right.
guess is the word, safe. It's like, I want people to be safe.
I would also
You know?
think that because it's your podcast, this isn't like a network show where people are going to tell you, we need a softer Paul, we need a harder Paul, we need a funnier Paul. They don't say anything. So you really can bring yourself into it. Like what I like about what I'm starting to do now with this is I can talk to someone in their home. They're not coming to my house with a green screen. We don't have any tricks. It's you and I having a conversation that other people are allowed to kind of listen in on. And I found that with you, even people you don't know, and I couldn't really tell sometimes whether you really knew, unless you actually stated, I've only seen you twice or something. But it feels like people talking really genuinely and really relaxed instead of the typical interview where there seemed to be a point.
Well, thank you. And James, I will say that one of the things you and I had in common, and I'm going to say this very delicately, is we both were social networkers before there were social networks. And we both recognized what the difference between a schmooze and actual networking was, and that there's a sincerity that you have to have. I mean, I'm sure we've both schmoozed people and it's been
Yeah, in
as
the old days.
disingenuous as,
Yeah.
But for the most part, what I liked is the conversation you and I would have had at 2 a.m. about how you can't really fake a connection. You can start and you can sort of have a contrived situation for meeting someone backstage at Edge Fest or something, and you can have a contrived situation, but at some point that is clearly transparent and that will go away. But if you go, wow, how was the flight? I heard Air Canada lost your guitar. Did you get it back? And you're not faking that concern. You're like, I see
Right.
how that
There, I
affected
know
you.
that. Yeah, your gear's lost. Yeah.
And then they go, oh, it's funny, because Smokey found it for us, but he had to call 8 people. And you're like, oh shit, I'm so glad you got your guitar back, and you're not faking this. You're not trying to win points with them. And that's when you start to have a real conversation. And sometimes you don't like them. And then if they don't handle the way you
I've had
talk to
that
them,
happen. Yeah.
yeah. So
What's your
in the
biggest
case,
surprise?
go ahead.
What's your biggest surprise? Like you've interviewed some big names. What is maybe 1 or 2 people that said something that took you out of nowhere?
Do you mean as an obnoxious thing?
Maybe in a way that left you not knowing what to say. Like not necessarily good or bad, but just like, oh.
I don't want to throw people under the bus, but I remember early days in print journalism when I was interviewing Richard Ashcroft of The Verve.
Yeah.
The Verve UK.
Sure.
Was it the English Verve? I forget what they called them over here.
Yeah, it was actually Verve UK is what it was called here, but I don't know what they call them there.
Yeah, I think there's an American Verve, that's why.
Right.
But Richard Ashcroft, and he had like, this is just before Bittersweet Symphony or before it hit. And I was sitting across the street from City TV in what used to be the Duck place next to the Beverly Tavern or something. It was some place like that. And I was sitting there and I was talking to him, and I knew very little about him other than the press sheet. And, I followed CFNY, so I knew British music. And so I said, so you mentioned in your press kit people like T-Rex and John Lennon and Sid Barrett of Pink Floyd. And he said, well, I'm as good as them. I'm the next thing from them. I'm the next person to be like them. And I was like, maybe I misunderstood him. If Richard Ashcroft is
it might have been a weird joke, the way that John Lennon said we're bigger than Jesus, or I don't know.
Yeah. I think he may have been trying to get some provocative press, but right. I didn't know how to handle it. So I had that uncomfortable feeling like you just met a tinfoil hat person, and like,
right about this.
Hydroxychloroquine person or something. It's like, I don't know about that. So I had to sort of like not laugh at him, because that would have been, if that was the game, I wasn't going to let him win it.
Right.
And then I just sort of said, well, explain that a little bit further. And then I did what I think Canadians do, is I said, no, you don't mean you're as good as him. Like,
you're right. That's
John Lennon. I mean,
yeah.
But anyway, but maybe he was right. Maybe he was as good as them, and maybe I had over glorified my heroes. I don't know.
What about someone you have interviewed in the last while that you absolutely had an affinity with that you thought, oh, I like this music, but you didn't realize, oh my, this is my spiritual best
Oh, well, Jason Isbell, the singer-songwriter, he started in sort of an alt country, but he's like just a singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
It was a setup interview, and I heard and loved his music for years. Knew him on Twitter a little bit, but not knew him. All of a sudden I'm talking to him, and it was a visual, so I could see him on Zoom, and it was the most oh my God, I would love to be friends with this guy. He is such a pure, righteous person who is, you can just tell he's good. People in the South, a lot of Christian people, I don't know what Jason's thing is, but a lot of Christian people in the South pretend to be Christian. And I'm not a Christian, and I'm not really advocating anything, but the thing about what Christianity is supposed to be, like somebody who loves their neighbor and somebody who has compassion for the downtrodden and recognizes the quality of their life if they just happen to have basic security and things like, and he seems so, and he's a recovering person, so I kind of identified with that.
Yeah.
And I just felt like immediately like this, I want to be, and actually I had the same connection with Lucinda Williams too, which is interesting. So I mentioned those two. Those are, two of the ones that I felt like where I didn't know anything about them as people. And I was like, oh my God, they're really great people. So,
I've been a fence sitter most of my life. My dad's a born again atheist, but I have a best friend who is one of those perfect Christians. He just doesn't judge, doesn't try to convert, doesn't bring it up all the time, but one of those people that is so kind. So I get it. My favorite guy, and I don't know if you've had a chance to interview him, was Paul Williams. And I did not expect that guy. He was the most funny, humble, again, recovering a drug addict and alcoholic, but what he would talk about was more real than anything. And I just went, I wish this guy would just come and live here in Toronto, and I could hang out with him all the time. Have you gotten to speak to him yet?
No, I haven't. I would love to.
I'll work on that for you, because he should be on your podcast.
Oh no, that's great.
Hey, I want to start off back to this music, because Gravelberries was long ago, in the 90s, early 90s, but the Paul and John, you put out a record a few years ago. I think it was 2014.
Yeah.
Right? And it seems to be the next logical progression, that you're still writing power pop.
Well, yeah. So what's neat about the Paul and John it's a local guitar player named John Mormon. And I've known John. I'll give you the short tour on this one. When I moved to Toronto from Toronto I moved to San Francisco from Toronto in '97, as I think you gave me a going away party. Yep. We moved here and we didn't know anybody. And then I got the equivalent of Now magazine was the Bay Guardian. And I just freelanced for them, and I went to review John Mormon's band and this John Mormon. And he also was on the bill with the Orange Peels, another great chamber pop band in the South Bay area of San Francisco.
Chamber pop, I like that.
I reviewed them both, and I was laudatory, and I said nice things. And then I got invited to sort of another gig, and we sort of socially knew each other. And I was looking to play music again at that point, seriously trying to think, I'm going to make it in San Francisco with the next whatever. The Gravelberries had been left behind in Toronto. Mm-hmm. And John and I talked about writing songs, and we kind of I finished some songs for him. I wrote lyrics, and then we moved away. Both my wife's visa and mine was expiring at the end of 2000. So we went on a big trip for 7 months and then moved to Vancouver. And Vancouver has a whole other great thing that happened there, but I'll get to that later. 5 years later, we have a chance to go back to the Bay Area, and I decide to really seriously try and finish a record with John. So this is now 2006, and that took about 8 years. And 8 years to get pressed. I mean, we basically finished it at 2013, 2012. And then we did a band camp, a Kickstarter to get vinyl press. And we did it right. We made a gatefold sleeve. We mastered it really well. We used Alan Clapp from the Orange Peels to...
I'm doing this because I know a lot of people who collect vinyl. Do you have any of those left?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
You can buy. I can get you one, but we also sell the remainders through our Bandcamp site. so the Paul and John Inner Sunset is available on CD and vinyl, and it's 180-gram gatefold sleeve with photographs by Paul Myers. Uh, and
I like
and
your photos so much. You've done a cover for me coming up later this year.
that's right. Appreciate that. I
I love
appreciate the
your
support.
photos. We'll get to that later too. This is
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So this is the thing. The whole. I don't know if this is is this well, that whole thing about the myth of the Native American thing, or the First Nations, the eating the whole buffalo. I don't know if that's racist or not, but I like the idea of holistically approaching like everything you can do. So I write lyrics, I write music, I write about music, I host podcasts, I take photographs, I do a little bit of graphic design. Anyway, so the long story short is the Paul and John Inner Sunset was the culmination of, well, I mean, let's say realistically 8 years, but it was long time happening. And then he's got a whole bunch of other things, and he was playing with the Orange Peels for a while. It was a bit of a scene around Mystery Lawn Studios, which was Alan Clapp's studio, and he still has the Orange Peels, and he's still doing that with his label. So
right. So you're in San Francisco, right? You're still in San Francisco.
I'm in the East Bay, which is hold on, I'm getting a bit of an echo here, so I'm just going to turn my headphones down.
You know what I like? I've been to your neck of the woods, and what I like, actually, I think I might have been to your house once, but what I like is you're in the kind of quiet area. It must be a little bit better when it comes to COVID and what's happening these days. You're in a pretty kind of a normal. It feels like a normal place to live as far as California goes.
Yeah, I'm in Berkeley. Apparently, California, the state, which, as you know, is it's a country.
Yeah.
There's so many people, and it's so long. The state goes up and down. It's a massive. I mean, California could secede. I don't necessarily want to get into that, but California is its own self-contained system, and it's one of the hot spots in America. But it does go by region within California, and the Bay Area, San Francisco City, because people have to live in cramped areas, got really badly hit, but not as badly because we locked down early. But then people are everywhere in America, people are creeping back into bars and stuff they shouldn't. I don't want to get all moralistic on anyone, but this ain't over, and I am not going into any interior restaurants. I'll order their food and do things to keep them in business, but I'm not going to like sit in a bar or any place that.
We've just entered stage 3 here, but the numbers are way, way down, and we'll see. I think a lot of people are okay with a patio. It's still a little bit, not everybody wants to go indoors, and certainly if you're indoors, you want high ceilings and air ventilation and get people wearing masks and all this other stuff. So
yeah.
I agree with you. We've got a ways to go, but I'm glad you're safe where you are. Tell me about Vancouver. You were just mentioning that you spent how many years there? I know you were on Vicky Gabbro all the time. I remember that.
Yeah. Can you still hear me, by the way?
Yep, perfectly.
Okay. I fixed my echo. I had an echo on this end. So in 2001, my visa was coming up for renewal, and my wife had a visa in the United States, and so we decided that I didn't want to stay where I was, and Lisa didn't want to stay where she was, so we decided to move to Vancouver. And before that, we went on this trip where for 7 months we went through Southeast Asia. It was kind of like what people do when they're old, only we were just a little old. And we we went through we went from we landed in Thailand and went to Vietnam, then India, Nepal, and then we went down through Malaysia, Singapore, and then Japan. And it was incredible. It was like the best thing I've ever done. It changed my life. So by the time we got to Vancouver, we had our stuff in storage, and we had it moved from San Francisco to Vancouver in a storage facility there. And we found an apartment right down in the west end of Vancouver. And Lisa was starting to do travel writing. We had no option of what we were going to do. Then a bunch of weird confluences happened. The Bare Naked Ladies had asked me to write their biography, which you are mentioned in because Kevin Hearn started his career, as far as I know, in your band, The Look People.
Yep.
And
I also booked the first Bare Naked Ladies concert in downtown Toronto.
You booked that?
They'd only played high schools, and their first gig in Toronto was at the Beehive, which is now called the Velvet Underground. They had a Friday night concert, $5 ticket, and had 100 people showed up, but they were all kids from Scarborough. No one in downtown Toronto knew them, yet they packed the room. Yeah. So long memories with those guys.
Well, then, so they had asked me to write they wanted to do a biography. They were just about to break with the album that was
With
Stunt,
Stunt, yeah.
Stunt, which had 1 week, the big international hit single, #1 in America. And it was just before that they had started getting the press push on that. And they were just starting to get it. So they met me in San Francisco and we went to Alcatraz and Kevin was sick. This was when Kevin Hearn had
Leukemia.
I, yeah, it was leukemia. I was going to say, like, nowadays we have the specific names of all the leukemias, but he had one of them, and it's bad enough. And he
Yeah.
survived it, thankfully, and he's thrived, and he's had a great life, and I love that guy. But we met the 4 bare naked ladies who were there at Alcatraz prison, which is now a state park, and the Warner Brothers had decided to launch their next line of releases for the season, and they invited all their what they call outfield, all the record stores and press people
Yeah.
from America to San Francisco with the groovy idea of meeting in a prison that was also the site of a Native American massacre. But anyway, and so, but they did this thing where they had, and when you think about the carceral system in America too, this is even
Right.
more like they wouldn't do this today. But they had different cells in the prison with different artists, and the journalist would be guided through the prison to meet the artist for 5 minutes. So
That's called
Stevie
wrong
Nicks,
and strong. That is a strong idea, but it's very wrong.
they loaded it. They loaded it. So Chris Isaac was in one cell. I remember. Uh, uh, I wish I could remember the name of the hip hop act because I didn't get to that area. They must have loved being in a cell for that one.
Right, right.
And
Singing, I don't want to fall in love.
yeah, exactly. He had just had the Wicked Game or was about to.
Right.
And Tina Marie, an artist named Tina Marie, who I still don't know much about, but
Yeah,
I
I
think
know her a little bit. Yeah, but that's a
And,
weird combination.
yeah.
It's
No,
all
it wasn't Tina
different.
Marie. It was Tina Arena. Sorry, her name was Tina Arena because I remember that now.
It's
So
also
yeah,
different genres of music, right? And different.
yeah. So
Yeah.
Stevie Nicks is in one jail cell, and I remember we went over on the ferry. We came back with Stevie Nicks in the boat, and she had the shawl on. And I remember saying, "Oh my God, she wears shawls off stage." I had no idea, and I didn't even have the nerve to talk to her. It was like I was just like I was kind of amazed to be in the same room with Stevie Nicks at all. Like it was just like
Right.
the molecules of Stevie Nicks were in the same room with the molecules of Paul Myers. Anyway, that day we decided to do this book. That was the first day I learned about Kevin being sick. So we did this book for their company, and I then accompanied the Bare Naked Ladies on tour as they came back through America promoting Stunt, and I ended up going on tour with them. Um, and anyway, so the long story of that is the book came out when I was in Vancouver. I was trying to get to that.
Yeah.
So I just realized this is a Paul Myers story. So it goes
It's okay
everywhere.
when you go into those funny stories. Keep going.
So the bottom line is I had written this book and it was finally coming out, and we just moved to Vancouver in July. June. I think it was June or July. We moved to Vancouver of 2001. Now the book was to come out in the fall. Now think what happened in the fall of 2001, and and think about September, say 11th
Oh
that
my
year,
word!
2000.
Right,
Yeah, and
right.
so I have this book ready to go, and I'm living in Vancouver, and they're gonna fly me to Toronto, and I I was like really excited. I got all this press lined up. It's gonna be really cool. It's like a homecoming for me because I get to go back to Toronto as the guy who told the story about the other Toronto band,
Yeah.
the official story, the authorized story. And so I first had to go to LA because my brother wanted me to work on a. I can tell this story. I don't usually tell Mike Myers stories, but my brother's Mike Myers, in case you haven't figured that out, in case he hasn't said it already in a
Oh
pre-intro.
yeah.
Uh,
That this is about you, but yes, your whole family is funny, and your brother made the most money from it. Yeah.
yes, that's right. Peter's very funny, and so Mike had hired me to help arrange 3 Casey and the Sunshine Band tracks and make a kind of a mashup, and then sort of help him finish the lyrics to this song about Goldmember, which is the character from the movie with
Right.
Beyonce.
Yeah.
And Beyonce was supposed to sing it. And so they wanted me to come down to LA to make a demo, and we hired an LA session singer to sing it in the style of Beyonce, which has got to be a thankless job. Like, because like, I mean, she's either going to be impressed that you nailed it and kind of freaked out, or she's going to be like, you think I sound like that? Anyway, so, but we spent the whole day working on this thing. And then I go back to the hotel. I'm staying in this hotel, the Westin Bella. I'll never forget it. Actually, I just saw Graham Nash the day before, and I talk to him for like a half an hour in the driveway of the hotel. I was like, I love this. I'm being flown to LA. Everything's great. This is going to be an amazing thing. The next morning, Mike phones me from his place and says, do you have the TV on? And I'm like, no. And he goes, oh, you turn it on. And he says to me the phrase I'll never forget, which is, two planes have crashed into the World Trade Towers. This is the time I caught up the story. It had already happened. So he goes, two towers have come down. The two towers have come down, and they think it's terrorism. And actually, they now think it's terrorism, and they don't know what's going to be next. And I'm like, okay, so Mike, you're playing a prank on me. And he goes, Paul, and he like, I've never, when a guy like my brother and my other brother, they're both kidders at times, and you can sort of tell when it's a bit. And he kind of did that thing of like, no, Paul, this is not a bit. And I was like, okay, this is really committing to the bit. And I was like, really? Right. And then he goes, no, Paul, honest to God, really, honest to God, there's no time for that. I can't, this is not a bit. Turn on the TV. And I turned on the TV. First thing I saw was the smoke around the World Trade, where the World Trade Center was. And I was like, of course I cried. Everyone cried. I was like, like you couldn't even imagine that. Right. Anyway, so that was the climate with which I was supposed to go to Toronto. And of course I couldn't get out for 7 days. You think the lockdown's actually worse in terms of how long you can't get out. But for 7 days, it was the first time they'd ever locked down all the flights. Yeah. Like they'd never done that. And so then I get to Toronto eventually, and they try to do that thing with like, let's talk about music as it relates to 9/11, like, and the Bare Naked Ladies. I'm like, you're trying really hard. Right. But I'm gonna move away from 9/11, believe it or not, one of the biggest events. And I'm gonna say that. So I go back to Vancouver, and I'm promoting the book there on Mojo Radio, which they had one in Toronto, and they launched one in Vancouver.
Right. Talk radio for guys.
Yeah, talk radio for guys. Which again, you wouldn't do this today. Right. But Mojo Radio ended up being really good for me in a strange way, even though I'm sure if you found air checks, I may have every so often tipped towards their idea. But most of the time I was skewing it towards, if you're an art rock nerd like me, you probably are the kind of guy that listens to my show. I was the place I would have a segment talking about Rufus Wainwright's new album, real guy stuff,
That's real guy stuff.
Exactly. So, and I would also do that. That's where I first learned to interview people. Like I interviewed Al Franken and Matthew Sweet and all these people, and Don Ross, my guitar player friend, who's an amazing guitar player. Anyway, this was happening when I was on Mojo Radio. They asked me to take over a show. They said, can you just do a show in the afternoon? And that gave me free radio college. I got paid to produce 2 hours of radio 5 days a week on a talk station. The only catch being I couldn't just play records because it was a talk license,
Right.
And,
well, I remember one of your guests, you got Randy Bachman to tell stories.
Oh my God, that was do you know the story though? What happened that day? So Randy Bachman, when I was a kid, I had gotten a BTO record my auntie in England had given me £5 to go to the record store, and she thought I was going to buy something English. And for some reason, I'd bought BTO's Not Fragile.
Right, great album.
Which had just come out. I was so excited to see a Canadian record in a Liverpool record store. I mean, all kinds of wrong here, but so I get, so I remember my aunt said, I gave you bloody £5 and you brought home that Tati album. That was the term she used, Tati. And she didn't mean Jacques Tati. So I booked Randy Bachman, and we have this 30-minute segment, which is, great. And the show usually it was 2 hours long. So usually we do like 30 minutes and then a break, and then we come back for 30 and then another 30 and another 30. So after we had gotten on along so well, much like we were talking about earlier, I had connected with Randy Bachman, told him all these great stories about my aunt, told him about, the significance. I told him back what the significance of Bachman Turner and the Guess Who were on young Canadian mind, thinking, oh, we can do it from here. Canadian bands can be internationally successful. That's really huge representation.
Yep.
And we go to a break, and I say, hey, we'll be right back. And I said, I want to come back in a second, Randy. And so we go to the commercials, and on the commercial I say, can you stick around for the next half hour? And he goes, yeah, man, I'm loving this. So it was like, so I had him for another half hour, and we talked about a lot of things. We went deep, and then by the end of it, he invites me to Salt Spring Island. No, he invites me to the gig he was doing at Malkin Bowl, which is an outdoor concert venue in Stanley Park. Yeah. And I had told him the story about how the Gravelberries used to play Taking Care of Business in the style of the Beastie Boys. We used to do we get up every morning from the long clock 1 and take the 8:15 to the city.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and I used to do scratching, record scratching on the sides of my wound strings, you know, and he said, "Oh, you got to come and do taking care of business with us." Right. And I was like, "Oh, okay, great." And he goes, "And bring your guitar because you're going to play." I'm like, "Oh, wow." So I ended up bringing my Telecaster.
Yeah.
In fact, I went to the sound check and I said, "You didn't really mean bring your guitar, right?" Because I just, and he goes, "Oh, no, no, man, go get your guitar." And I lived in the West End, so it was like a short hop away. So I went back to the house to get my Telecaster, came back, did the sound check, and then yeah, later in the show he calls me up on stage and he says, you know, he actually told me on the set list, he goes, "Start making your way backstage during this song because that's the next song I'm going to call you up."
Mhm.
I'm like, so I'm up there and I sing Taking Care of Business. I wore a denim jacket, a blue denim jacket, because that's what I used to wear when I was 16,
Right.
15 or something. And I played, and I ended up, he says, "Take a solo." And I'm standing beside Randy Bachman and I used their amp, one of their extra amp and their rat pedal. And I just cranked it and played this like probably horrible solo, but in my mind, I was like a rock god.
Yeah.
And I'm like playing like on stage with Bachman and his band, and then they do like a medley at the end of the show, where they jam a bunch of songs, and they waves me over, get back on stage, and so it was like one of the weirdest and happiest days of my life. It was like kind of unexpected, and I guess that's what happens when you're in the media locally. You get perks, but I
Well,
think that had to do with the connection.
it's hard to believe his age because he is an excitable kid. He's in like I use the word nerd with all affection. You and I are nerds, and he's a nerd.
Yeah,
We get so excited for music. He writes to me when he's in Scandinavia, going, "I just played to like 20,000 people, and it never gets old. I love this. I had so much fun." And he's never bragging in my mind. He is
yeah,
excited, sharing his excitement. I
yeah,
love
yeah. I know it was great.
storytellers that don't hold back. Drop the names. Tell me who was at the party. I love to hear those stories.
And then the PS to the whole story is that he at the time he was remarrying Denise, and I don't know where they are. I think they broke up again, but and it was an LDS, what's the word, Mormon. It was a Mormon thing,
Yeah,
and they had a resealing ceremony at his house in Salt Spring Island,
yeah.
and that's what they call it, resealing. And I'm invited over. So we take a float plane to Salt Spring Island and stay in a motel. And then we go to the thing. And I used to drink Diet Coke. By then I was not drinking alcohol. And
Mhm.
I couldn't bring the Diet Coke into the property because it's caffeine. And I was like, I hadn't, my one sort of tool for not drinking alcohol at parties, of course, there was no alcohol there either. But
Yeah,
the one tool I had was to drink Diet Coke. And at the time I was super addicted to it. I don't do that stuff anymore even. But,
right.
anyway, so, and the only like, and it, then it trails off, but I mean, Tal Bachman was there, and Bill from Chilliwack, and I sat next to the boss, the owner of, I think it's Fred Gretsch, the Gretsch guitar guy.
Oh,
And
amazing.
like, he's this like older man from Tennessee or something. And he's telling me about Randy's Gretsch collection, and which he takes me over to see. Randy takes me to show me his Gretsch collection, and only Neil Young has more, I think, or has the same amount as
As
of
yeah,
Gretsch guitars. Yeah, those flying, what do they call those? White
yeah,
Dove guitars. And
every kind. I know. His room. He had a place here in Toronto in Liberty Village. He's back out now in Victoria, and he is working with Tal again. They've got a couple of projects coming up. I just heard
oh,
from him
cool.
last week. He's super busy. I want to go to your photography for a moment because we have so many things we can cover. Um,
Absolutely.
was it your trip to Asia? Was it your trip when you suddenly went, "I need to do this," or did you have that bug earlier? Because
Uh, uh,
I just want to give you one weird compliment. Some of my favorite photos of yours, it could be like a street light and a tree behind it and a moon setting, or just some composition thing that works so beautifully. But sometimes it's really quite kind of oddly normal and
Thank
beautiful.
you. Thank you. Me and photography go back to when I had a Polaroid camera as a teenager. I used to I just love the idea of capturing an image, and that the image became something I could take with me, right? So sort of like hunting, only you're not killing anyone.
Yeah,
And and then years later, and then I thought, okay, like so many things, I have zero self-confidence about everything. So anything technical involving dark rooms and stuff like that, I was like, I'll never be a photographer. I'll never, learn to play the piano or anything. Like, I'll never, those things are too hard. So I just, do instant things. So
right.
then years later, um, smartphones got, I took a camera for a while and I wasn't really great at it, to be honest. And I didn't know how to stop and really make the frame. I what's the photographers talk about this thing, the difference between taking pictures and making pictures. Do you know
Hmm.
that difference?
Yep.
So there's a conscious decision you make to consciously frame and line up and focus. And it does take a second. You can't just hold the camera up and go schlop, because then it's going to be like early photographs of mine. They're blurry because I'm moving the camera. I didn't even stop to take the picture. I'm
Right.
going, oh, hold the camera somewhere near here. And and people do that too with their own selfies. They'll just go bang, and half of their head is gone, and not intentionally. And I
Right.
think
Or not
intention,
9 photos of the same image.
and exactly. And art of any kind isn't, you can do instant art, but the intention comes in the editing, the intention comes, so you can blow your guitar licks all over the place and go go tonal, whatever. And the thing is, what are you then making a cut of to show someone? That frame is the art, I think.
Right.
I mean, that's
Exactly.
very general, and I'm sure there's a lot of holes in that. But so when I started the smartphone, the iPhone 3, uh, I think it was called the 3G or 3 or something. iPhone, it might have been iPhone 6.
Yeah.
And Lisa used to go to this farmer's market and on Saturdays in Berkeley, and I would start to walking. She would go and she'd say, "You should just come for the walk anyway." And I'm like, "I don't care. I'm going to stay here and just veg out and read or listen to music." And she'd say, "No, just come to the market." And I brought my phone and started taking pictures of flowers on the sidewalk or cracks in the pavement.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh my God, this is so cool." And you could edit it. Like if I hadn't quite lined it up, I could just make it perfect and
Yeah.
just the way I want it. And then I started getting really into taking pictures of the market. And then I was like, and then we started going on vacations and stuff. And I would take the iPhone with me. And then at some point, I decided to get a Sony A6000. And I'm not super technical, so I just wanted a higher resolution photograph that I could actually print.
Mhm.
And it really use the kit lens most of the time. Sometimes I use a little bit of a zoom, and I don't know shit about it. I don't know much about it. Like a lot of it is just trial and error,
Yeah.
because I guess I'm an autodidact,
You have that
and
camera on your trip? Was that the
uh,
photos you
in
took on your trip that when I started seeing pictures of, it could be jungles or things. What
oh no, that was Africa. Yeah, that was the A6000.
beautiful photos.
Yeah, yeah. I thank you, and thank you. I gotta say that's when I felt that, part of half some of my most impressive to myself photographs are when the thing itself was impressive. Like, so I go to Joshua
Sure.
Tree. I go
Right.
to Joshua Tree Park, and you take a picture of a sunset with a million trees and some crazy rocks, and you're like, frankly, anyone could have taken that picture and it would be great. But I do know where it's me. I know what I bring to it, and I kind of know my voice.
Well, the photo
I know
you're
what I'm doing.
describing, I mean, you had several from that series, but the photo you're describing from Joshua Tree, when I saw it, I had been looking everywhere for something that reminded me of those spaghetti westerns, but kind of in a more general way. And of course, because the band's called the Tiki Collective, like I didn't
Right.
want it to be too much about West, but when I saw that photo, it screamed at me. And so I'm so excited. That's not coming out on vinyl anytime soon, but I hope to finish that album because that was a beautiful cover.
Well, thank you for yeah. So that's how I got into photography. I just basically fell into it, and it became. But I want to say this one thing about that. So
Yeah.
as a guy who was always knocking himself out to become a musician, and then sort of laterally moved into being a writer, and it actually makes my music feel better. I make instrumental music as Flam, and
Yeah.
that stuff's available on Bandcamp also. And I just make this sort of Eno-ish sort of soundtrack music. But that all comes out of the fact that I'm not trying to beat my brain to do it. And I'm trying to, like, my brain gets loose. The creativity just becomes part of it. And then you harness that. So photography came out of that lateral move, and it's made me feel like a more holistic person. I feel like photography is Zen for me. It's a way of going, stop, look at that tree. Oh my God. Stop, look at that sunset. Stop, look at that crack in the pavement. Because I gotta say, some of my own favorite pictures, and a musician who I admire, I'm not going to name drop. So a musician I admire told me that they love my cracks in the pavement shots the most. And I was like, wow, that's so cool, because that means they get me, like that means they totally understand, because it's
That
minutia
was
can be
my
great
original
if it's the right.
compliment. Sometimes your best photos, in my opinion, are ones that nobody would ever take. And maybe it is a thing that's a real blessing for you because your mind works a million miles an hour. You've got a lot of thoughts, but when you stop to look at something, it is that moment of repose that few people take. So it's a beautiful thing to continue.
It is a Zen thing for sure.
John Baldry, Todd Rundgren, and recently Kids in the Hall, all of those
Yeah.
followed Bare Naked Ladies.
Yeah.
It's real diverse. The Baldry I remember, and I was always a fan of him. I think what's interesting is Todd Rundgren, and of course, as an XTC producer, I'm sure you were a diehard fan. Was that a hard one to write, being such a fan of somebody?
Yeah. The thing about the Todd Rundgren book too was it came out of the kind of brain that you know me. So like brain I have where somebody would mention Todd Rundgren for years, and I was a big fan of his solo work, of his own albums, and I knew that he produced his own albums and he produced the work with Utopia, his band, and he also produced like all. But I would say, oh, do you know he produced Meatloaf's "Bat Out of Hell"? And they go, wow. And then I go, but hold on, he also produced the New York Dolls debut album. Like, and you're like, wow, that's nothing like Meatloaf. And I go, but hold on, he produced Patti Smith's "Wave." I'm
Right.
like, whoa, and then everyone's like, so then eventually you start blowing people's minds with this, and you think, what is it about this guy who is kind of like, at the time, I don't think a lot of people were talking about Todd Rundgren anymore, but the people who knew, like Cameron Crowe, I Cameron Crowe's been very good to me. Like he's been very good about being a mentor. And I remember the thing he said to me was, I just love to talk to somebody who gets Todd Rundgren the way you do. Cause he's a huge Todd
So,
Rundgren fan.
yeah.
So when you do connect with somebody who gets it, so I thought, so I pitched it to Jawbone Press in England, thinking, who's going to buy this idea? And the idea was to go and interview all the bands of note that Todd Rundgren worked with, and interview Todd too,
Mhm.
and then put it together in kind of a creative resume. Basically, it's him walking through his curriculum vitae,
Right.
and to my great credit, and I did a lot of work, to the credit of the book, I got Patti Smith. I got Lenny Kaye. I got actually everyone in the Patti Smith group talked to me, except the people who are no longer here.
Yeah.
And everyone in XTC talked to me, including Prairie Prince from the Tubes, who played on Skylarking. Many people from the Tubes talked to me, including Mike Cotton and Prairie
Hilarious.
and Bill Spooner. And so I got all the different, and I got Meatloaf and Steinman to talk to me. And it was amazing. And it became a list of like even some of the lesser known records like Jules Shear, Watchdog, and of course the Pursuit of Happiness did 2 records with him, so I got them on the record. So that's another great band, by the way. When you want to talk about we mentioned the Gravelberries, and I mentioned
Canada.
so to me the Pursuit of Happiness, Sloan, and the Odds, and to some degree the Bare Naked Ladies, as in terms of influence on me.
Mhm.
I like Alternative Girlfriend by Stephen Page is one of those songs that I wish I'd written,
Yep.
and Stephen is such a great guy, and actually I like the whole band, but I seem to have like lately bumped into Stephen more often.
Yeah, me too. That's weird. I see Kevin Hearn a lot, but Stephen, he's really
Yeah.
out there doing stuff. That's for sure.
I do want to give them a shout out though, because the Bare Naked Ladies are doing this thing now where they have concerts, online. They call selfie cams or something
Yeah.
like that, and they do incredible work with those edited multicam videos that everyone's on their isolation. And
Yeah.
they just did one with Kevin Staples and Carol Pope,
Oh, cool.
um,
Rough trade.
and
Yeah.
they did High School Confidential, and it was so great. And in it, Carol was walking down a street past a school singing it, which, like, this is something that should have happened years ago without the lockdown. So anyway, I
Right.
digress as usual.
I love the digression, but I want to go to Kids in the Hall because I
Yeah.
saw you in Toronto. That was a huge event. It was so nice to have you interview them and them interview you, and there was so many laughs, and I
Yeah.
learned a lot. I didn't know about Scott's ill health. I knew he was not healthy, but I didn't know
Right.
the seriousness of it. When
Yeah.
I was up there with the Kids in the Hall in North Bay, they were shooting a TV series.
Yeah, they were shooting Death Comes to Town.
Death Comes to Town,
And is that your neck of the woods?
yeah, that's where I'm
Yeah.
from. And so I was up there visiting family and went out drinking with them, but Scott couldn't make it. No one told me why. I found out at your book launch. And that
Oh,
book,
wow.
Kids in the Hall, is the first book. The minute that COVID hit, I'd read a bunch of it already, but I started from beginning to end and said, I got time. I'm going to get into this. My question is, what was it like the San Francisco gig? You're getting a lot of these Kids in the Halls together in the same room. and they're obviously more famous now than they were when they put out the show. What was the energy like in San Francisco? People think of Kids in the Hall as a Canadian group, but not in the US. Uh-oh. Frozen.
Yeah.
Got it.
Uh, uh, we're getting that lag again. Shit. It kind of cacked out again.
Okay.
We'll get through this though. I believe we'll get through
I
this.
think we're pretty much almost ready, almost done. I just want to know about the feeling in San Francisco, because people here think Kids in the Hall are a Canadian group, but they were huge in the US.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay. So in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, like I interviewed Bruce and Mark and Dave in LA, and the energy, and Norm Hiscock also was in LA, and the energy there was so great. Like I think what Canadians would get from my book One Dumb Guy is that the Kids in the Hall had much more of a deep influence on the next generation of comedy and also of their peers. Like, so people like Mr. Show might not have been so influenced by the actual work as being kind of like, oh, thank God someone's doing what we want to do, so we're going to do it now. So Bob Odenkirk and David Cross, and then people like Dana Gould, who's a great comedian, and these people were telling me that the Kids in the Hall meant something to them. And Fred Armisen, who was saying he loved how Canadian it was because he didn't know anything about Canada. So for him, he was like, wow, Toronto cops are different than American cops.
Right.
And he didn't like, and he would like, they would hear an exotic accent the way we might watch Flight of the Conchords, you know what I mean? So I watch Flight of the Conchords and I think, I'm not from New Zealand. I say dead, not deed. But, I don't, you can decode it because the comedy's there.
The
right?
Cops is the best example of how different we are. The jokes we would make about police are really soft and kind of dopey and fun, and it's different. Also with the Kids in the Hall, the fact that their skits were artistic. Saturday Night Live launched so many big famous careers, but a lot of their skits, I don't think, hold a candle to Kids in the Hall.
The Kids in the Hall were a huge influence on a lot of people, and I was so glad that I got to be the one to tell that story because I was around for it. When they played the Rivoli, and when they played when they were doing the tapings at CBC Mutual Street.
On Mutual and Jarvis, yeah.
Yeah, was that 25 Mutual? No, it was it was Mutual Street anyway. It was a Mutual Street studio, and like I still have ticket stubs from tapings, and then also I was on the set of Brain Candy when they were shooting that certain scenes, and just to know that I've been sort of watching as they got further and further into their careers, and maintained contact with most of them, and I actually reacquainted myself with a couple of them. Like I think I've always had a connection to the Kids in the Hall socially, but I never really got that close to Bruce until I started doing the book, and I was scared of Bruce. I told him this. I was scared of Bruce because he was the one who seemed to be the most like, if you had any bullshit in you, Bruce would tell you. Yeah. But maybe I have less bullshit now because he seems to be a charming man to me now. So. Hey, I think he is a great guy, by the way.
Who is the book you haven't written yet? Like you mentioned earlier, you like to make some ambient music like Brian Eno. I put Brian Eno in that Todd Rundgren. Oh my God, people know his ambient, or people might know he worked with Bowie, but most people have no idea.
Yeah, or they know he worked with you too. I mean, that's the other thing.
Right,
like,
right. They might know that. But they wouldn't give Devo and Coldplay and U2 in the same sentence usually.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Is that a guy you're trying to do a book on?
Well, there's like women I would do books on too, like Kate Bush. I feel like Kate Bush, the producer, is not talked about enough. Everyone thinks of the classic
Wuthering Heights.
Yeah, the classic English waif. Teen boys loved her. But when you think about what she did on The Dreaming or and Hounds of Love, but like The Dreaming is where she really, I think, started flexing her muscles as a producer. And she made choices. Like everything on those records, she's as badass as Joni Mitchell in terms of making choices.
Yeah.
And Joni is like another hero. I would, in terms of comedy, the one thing I've been dying to do is I'm a huge fan of like SCTV, and I feel like there's areas there, but I sort of am much like the Kids in the Hall influence in America, I feel like John Candy would be someone specifically, if you could follow his journey through, John Candy would be a great subject, because you go to the influence he had of, like, within America and international culture. But SCTV is like, it's like someone who was in the Beatles, and then, like, I guess Wings would be, I don't know. So the idea that he already had made enough of a mark with SCTV, and then he became a movie star.
Exactly.
So, like, I'm already in awe of him for being Doc Johnny LaRue. So that's somebody. Who else?
I
I'll
did
tell you
not.
what I
We're
won't do
gonna,
is I won't do Mike Myers.
I
I won't
didn't
do
think
Mike
you were
Myers
going to say that,
because
by the
it's
way.
so obvious that something like that, I could write the whole story, but at the same time, how can you write about somebody who's like that close to you without feeling like awkward about it, you know? So I will draw on Mike for whatever I'm doing whenever I can, because if he was there. But the same way I would draw on you. I would draw on you, or not literally on you, but I mean, knowing you, you probably want me to draw on you. But you know, I mean, who else? I guess I'd have to think about it, but I mean, I want to do a book on Jeff Lynne. Nobody seems as excited as me, but Jeff
Right.
Lynne is another one of those guys. Jeff Lynne is another one of those guys who, as an artist, he made like a name for himself with, like, you know, the Idol Race, the Move, and ELO. And then as a producer, he's like, you know, the Wilburys, Tom Petty. Uh, he produced Brian Wilson. He's produced Paul McCartney. Like, he's a
Yeah.
producer artist, and yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that side of him either. I know him from Electric Light Orchestra, and that's about it. So that might be a good one.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I'd be
you
very
just
interested
said
in that.
Jeff Lynne, Kate Bush, Brian Eno, John Candy. That's kind of all over the place. I like it.
Well, that's the other thing. Okay, talk about lateral thinking. The Kids in the Hall book allowed me to break out of writing music biographies and talk about an abiding passion of mine, which has been comedy from day one. Comedy and music. I mean, I went to Second City workshops when I was younger. Thought maybe I was going to be a comedian, and I think I rose to the right level and went away. So to be able to talk about comedy, it's been very good for me. Like, it's been very good for me to sort of get that nerd chop out, you know, like, so it'd be like, you know, maybe a book about a photographer next. I don't know. Like, you know, that'd be kind of cool.
Well, I love speaking with you, and you are only my second interview on this new Zoom format. So,
Hopefully, yeah.
with the exception of one little glitch in streaming, I think this worked pretty good.
Hey, and welcome to the club of remote interviewing, because I do it all the time for my Record Store Day podcast, and I've been doing it since day one, mostly because not that many artists are coming through. I mean, we've only done two. Jane Weedlin of the Go-Go's did it live, and Robin Hitchcock did it live, and as far as I know, and we did a live taping with Dave Foley. I think it might be one other. Anyway, but most of the time I'm relying on internet lines like this. And so, you know, editing around glitches is my job. I do this all the time. I'm just right now trying to deal with echo lag on something where you hear somebody doesn't wear headphones on their end.
Yeah.
And it's like, so you have to cut around the echo. And anyway, you'll get it, man. It's great. Good luck.
And in the instructions here, it will say where to find your books, where to find your stuff. I want to make sure people support, and this has been a great interview. I should also thank, this is backwards, but this is Elva's All Natural Cleaners. You see that spout? Don't drink it. No, don't drink it. Clean with it.
No.
All natural. There. That's one of my sponsors.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad you have a sponsor. I
wanted this to be a sponsor. Classe en Chance 2013. Yeah. They don't make the wine anymore, so I just look at this bottle and remember how good it tasted.
Yeah.
The sponsor.
Sponsored by a label that's not there. Yeah.
Okay. That's where I'm at in my career.
Always good. And thanks for your enthusiasm over the years. You've always seen something in me that maybe at times I didn't see in myself, and I appreciate that.
Well, you are my funky soul brother. You have said so many things in this campaign or in this interview that made me go, that's me. I want to try things easy, instant gratification. I want to make art and take photos and do a million things, but you do have to slow down and take time on things. But we both have that same kind of head going everywhere. So this was a very simple interview. I enjoyed listening to your stories, and can't wait for your next book.
Okay, thank you very much.
Cheers. Thanks, brother. And now I hit this one.